Hi, I'm Gabriel,
Hi, I'm Luis.
and welcome to Capri News, a series of updates with relevant topics to the coffee industry from seed to cup. Today, in our fourth episode, we're taking a different turn. We're going to invite several specialists in the coffee chain to discuss a more technical approach,
Technical? How technical?
Einstein level technical.
You mean, are we going to discuss relativity theory?
Almost that. We're going to discuss sample roasting and the relativity of time.
Wow. And
Yeah.
Probably even more important.
Yes, exactly.
Have you ever thought that sometimes a champion or a potential champion takes a lot of time, money, and effort training for a championship, and because of a couple of seconds can be disqualified? And in the other hand, have you ever thought that some farmers take a lot of time to plant coffee, 2 to 3 years to start producing, a whole year to harvest a crop, and then because of just a couple of seconds, a sample can be also rejected?
Wow, that's very deep. Surely everything is relative, right?
Yes, and speaking about Einstein, who is going to be our guest for this episode?
Yes, our first guest is none other than the Wonder Woman and genius of roasting, Ann Cooper.
Wow, that's great. Oh
Yeah.
my God!
Yes.
For the ones that don't know, Ann Cooper is my personal coffee sister. Ann is an absolutely incredible consultant on coffee roasting, has a pretty solid career of more than 25 years in the coffee industry, passing through US in big roasting companies, and nowadays in Australia, have been working in some of the most important coffee roasters from Australia. She's also an AST trainer. She's a CQI Q grader, and she's absolutely humble and one of the best persons that we know in the coffee chain.
Wow, that's amazing. What a resume, right?
Yes, for sure.
So let's give it up for Ann Cooper. We hope you enjoyed this episode and this talk, this amazing talk we've had with her. And
Yes, and please don't forget on subscribing in Capricornio channel and following us in social media. And in Coops we trust. Cheers.
cheers.
Coffee roasting Wonder Woman, our genius, and Cooper. Good day,
Hello,
mate. Thank you
bom
so
dia.
much.
Bom dia.
Thank you so much for accepting this and for sharing
having
your
me.
insights with us.
Yes, of course. Thank you, and thank you for joining us. I think to kickstart, Luis, um, most of we, of course, we know Anne. We've heard a lot about her. Maybe you could give us some about your background. Tell everybody about you a little bit, or your background in roasting and in the coffee industry. So just we get like warmed up.
Excellent. Well, I guess, yeah, sort of in a nutshell, I've been in the coffee industry for 30 years now. So I was the typical university student working in a cafe to make ends meet. And I just really realised I loved, hospitality and working in the service industry. And so I finished my uni and ironically ended up back at the university running the coffee carts. So lots of high volume sort of barista work. Through that, I got to know some really great people and I got my first opportunity to start training. So I started doing all of the accredited barista training for the Coffee Academy from Melbourne, but up in Brisbane in Queensland, so doing all of that. And then through that, got involved in the barista competitions, and that's when I first sort of had to start learning how to roast, because I had to obviously understand what I was presenting and showcasing in the competition. And then I got my first step into production roasting, again through meeting people in the competitions. And then in about 2009, 10, I moved to the US and I started working for Dallas Brothers. And that's what sort of got my first introduction to. I think I say I really grew up in coffee when I moved to the US and really got a great chance to learn more about specialty and especially like the farming practices, because I got a chance to go down to Brazil quite a lot working on the farms, and then learning more about the growing and processes, and of course the roasting aspect. And then got involved in the US, did my Q graders, got involved with did the barista competitions again, had lots of fun getting involved with the guilds and everything, and yeah, it was really great. Lots of professional growth in that time. Lots of meeting amazing people. So after my time in the US, I came back to Melbourne, and I was the head roaster for Proud Mary. Did a bit of work with some other companies, and then sort of hit a bit of a ceiling with the production roasting, and just kind of went, well, what's next? What can I do with all of this amazing stuff that I've learned? And I was seeing a lot of Aussies still going back overseas to go to the workshops and events, and I thought, well, can I bring back to Australia what I learned? And that's when I started my roasting course, and then also started consulting, moving around with roasters. So that's been 9 years now doing that. And then, of course, along the way, I got to meet the wonderful Luis, where I had the opportunity to come back to Brazil and teach, at the roaster camps, and really learn, a lot more, even more about, Brazil coffee, especially from the roasting perspective. I think it was, really fascinating, always remembering that in Brazil, we're roasting coffee as a fresh crop, and there's different ways to deal with that versus as a roaster, as myself, in the, other end of the world, where, dealing with, sort of different, the coffee in a different state, a different condition, basically. So, so that was, really, wonderful lessons learned, with that. So then, last 9 years has been wonderful. I've been very spoiled, had the chance to use a lot of different, roasting machines, be in many different situations, and always trying to bring that experience through, with clients, every time, whether it's through the course or, in the consulting. So, and here I am.
That's the humble and I can add, you have the coolest t-shirts from the whole coffee chain.
Yes.
And
yes,
also
always gonna have great t-shirts.
and also I need to emphasize the amazing article, the work you made on Can You Taste the Roaster? That was a paradigm break into the industry. If you also could speak about it.
Yeah, so I guess the premise behind that research was, as a consultant, we get asked all the time about what's the best machine to use. And really, it's like whatever machine you want to use, because a lot of people get nervous that if they don't have an expensive, fancy roaster, they think that they can't get a good roast out of it. And that's not the case. It's really about how you want to roast. So we went about, so I did the research with Rob Hoos, and we basically used, for example, like a Probat as the control roaster, and whatever profile we did on that machine, we had to match exactly on different systems. So the classic is always matching against a Loring, a Diedrich, and then I think we also did Gießen as well. And the idea is to show that it's the profile that influences flavour, not the machine, because there are lots of those thoughts out there that if you use an air roaster, you get more acidity. If you use a drum roaster or a heavier, Probat or something, you get more body and sweetness. It's just about the build quality and the materials of those machines and their control features. It's like, that's what influences, how you roast. But you need to bring to the roaster your recipe. Yes, I did the research, with Rob Hoos, and essentially the goal was, because we get asked all the time, what's the best roaster to buy? And it's about reassuring people, because they get a bit nervous about buying, a cheaper machine, and there's nothing wrong with that, because they think that they can't get a good profile, out of that. What that means though is that depending on the build of the machine, it just influences how you want to roast. And that comes down to the control features. So if you've got a heavy roaster or a light roaster, that will sort of determine how best you can apply the heat or not apply the heat, with your profile. So we got we did a control roast on the Probat, and then we matched that exact profile in terms of the 3 phase times and the roast color. They all have to be exact. I think we had less than 1% variance on everything, on all the data points on the profile. So between the Provat, the Lorien, the Diedrich and the Gießen, they were all, exactly the same basically. Then we set up lots of triangulations and we did lots of tastings in Australia, US and Europe. I think we did more than 2,000 sort of total tastings, and we got really great results in that some people could pick an odd bowl, but not one person could name the machine. So it was really trying to break down that whole process of, that's clearly from a Lorien or a Diedrich or a Provat. It was just like, there's something kind of different, but no one stepped back and went, that's definitely, a machine. So it was just trying to help break down that. And I guess at the end of the day, we're trying to make roasters really be more, really own up to their roasting and really be more on top of how they want to roast. And that comes down to the whole, do you want to roast fast, do you want to roast slow? And then can this machine allow you to roast that way, basically? And then and what that looks like in terms of is the timing of those 3 key phases, and along with your end roast level. So I think what I see a lot of in the industry is a lot of that thought process missing. Like roasters aren't really thinking about the total, structure of their roasting. And then of course, for you guys doing, with the green side of things, we oddly sometimes forget about the coffee rolling around in the roaster. We're so focused on whether it be the lines on the screen or the software or a certain control feature on the roaster. So I've often got to remind roasters, well, are you roasting the coffee in the roaster, or are you roasting the software, or the machine? So what are you sort of like focusing on? Because we've always got to remind ourselves, we've got to always bring to the roaster how we want to roast. That's the driving, sort of decisive factor. And then, because that's basically going to teach you how to operate your roaster. So the research was great in really, helping roasters see a lot more about, their roasting approach, their structure, and all the data collection that comes along with that, how they're showing themselves, how they're roasting, basically.
The study was really enlightening, and I took part in one of the cupping or the tasting activities, and I can say it was unbelievable that you can really not say, because what is nice in what you did is that it was a triangulation, but then you need to say if you were sure which one was the different one. That was the tricky part. And then when you made the statistics of the probability of being sure and just by lucky, it had almost no difference. I think that was the nice part of the study.
Yeah. And we did every possible combination of the machines in the tastings as well. So everything was always up against each other. And then of course we had steps that have to be the same, because that's just part of the whole, sort of process. And I think even as a warm-up tasting, when we did the event, when we did Firestarter, and we did 3 press pots for everyone to drink, and we said, just tell us which one do you think is different, and it was all the same coffee. So it was a really great way to start framing everybody up with their thought processes and how they're tasting, how they're drinking, and all that kind of stuff. It was really fascinating hearing people go, the third pot was this, and this, and the second one was this, and we're just like, it's all the same.
We need a little more neuroscience to evaluate roast, yeah. But just getting to our topic of this conversation. So this is the first episode that we are bringing one expert from the chain for a little more technical discussion. In this specific episode, we want to discuss about how important sample roasting is. And you often tell us that this is a chain of flavor. So I started asking you about this study because it's really enlightening, because you can achieve almost the same flavors with different machines if you understand everything that you are doing. And it's not about beautiful screens or apps or technologies. It's about understanding how to proceed your cooking and timing and the phases and understanding what you are doing. So this is the first question that I would like to address you. How do you consider how important it is sample roasting for a green buyer or for a roastery or even through the whole specialty coffee chain. And how do you see it is being done in terms of procedures or in terms of care, and what could be done in terms of the state of the art of sample roasting as a powerful tool to communicate origin with final roasters?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like cupping. It's like, what's the purpose? Like, what's the purpose of the sample roasting? And I guess that's when we've got to remind ourselves of the different categories of people in the chain and how they're using it. So there's people like yourself at Origin, then you've got obviously the traders, then you've got the roasters and the roasteries, even some consumers like home roasters, are tinkering away, doing their own, level of sample roasting as well. But I guess ultimately the purpose is, we want to explore the characteristics, of the coffee. And we're doing that both physically and sensory, sort of in that sampling process, because we're exploring, because we need to be obviously measuring the coffee, making sure that we're understanding the screen size, the moisture content, the density, what role that plays, because we're exploring how the coffee reacts to heat. So we're using that sample roasting process as a way to understand physically how does the coffee, react to heat. But then of course we're thinking about from a sensory perspective, what do we want to then taste in that coffee, based on obviously its variety and the process. So then as a roaster, and even as a trader, when we sample roast it, we can then describe some attributes and flavours, that are attractive for marketing and selling. The roaster goes, great, I like those flavours, I'm going to take that and I'm then going to direct it to a particular product. So I guess, it's always about that, there's an end product in mind, and also I guess an extraction method, a way we then present it, to an end consumer. So it's a really, it's a massive exercise in discovery, isn't it, with the sample roasting. And I guess along the way, things have evolved in terms of, equipment, how we do that, what we're using, and what does the actual structure of a sample roast look like, being defined as what does the profile approach, kind of look like? Because we're generally only roasting, 50 grams, 100 grams, generally at a time, depending on how much we're able to get, because sometimes some lots are so small that we can only afford to, do a small amount. So then, we really then need to make sure that our approach is quite clear. So sort of going back to that, being clear on how we want to roast this coffee, in terms of the stages. So, and this is where I definitely, obviously see a bit of influence from the different machines, because we've got, a lot of us, like myself, I started, sample roasting on the ProVat BRZ, the double, barrel or a single barrel. I think you guys, you've got your ProVat, sample roaster. And then, we start moving into the air roasters, and then other technologies are coming along, along the way. But I'm still not seeing that structure in terms of, spending a certain amount of time in each of the phases, and I think that's still really applicable for sample roasting. And so it's then, I think the design of the machines do influence the timing, of those. But definitely the air roasters, there's an aspect where there's essentially, technically the first minute of the roast doesn't exist, because of the way that it just basically starts and then, starts and just kicks off. There's basically no turning point, which is fine. Whereas on the ProVats we've got that, that normal lag of what we do in production. On that point as well, I would never use a sample roast to then transfer directly to a production machine, just because from a heat transfer perspective, we're roasting such a small amount of coffee, that small amount just naturally does move, slightly quicker. I'm sure we can 100% slow down the roast to mimic what would happen on a production machine, but are we going to still get, the benefit of those flavours on a 50 to 100 gram sort of style batch, I'm not sure if it's that, going to be that applicable. So yes, I think just seeing still maybe either people approaching their sample roasting not being quite clear on their strategy, and then that does have big implications to the final tasting result, because sensory wise then things might not showcase as well as they should because of the roasting approach. So having some sort of clearer agreed standard, the sample roasting. I think we all kind of agree things like the roast level, current recommendation of, is it Act 163 on grind? I think that's quite dark as an industry standard. I know the rest of the world is definitely not roasting like that. I think we're all well and truly up in definitely between Act 175 and onwards, for sample roasting. So, but the time, the roasting time does get influenced a little bit by the machine, but there's ways to think about that in terms of, you can match your air roaster to your drum roaster quite nicely and efficiently and consistently. Yeah.
In terms of time, could you give us some general tips, like how many minutes to yellow, how many minutes to first crack in terms of development?
So I think sensibly on a sample roast, I'm quite happy with anywhere between like around a 4.5 minute time for yellow. And I find anything less than that can start to encourage just a little bit of unnecessary dryness, in the coffee. And then from that kind of yellow, dry end colour change through the first crack, I'm probably around 3.5 minutes in that middle section. And again, if I go less than that kind of 3.5 minute time frame, I do get very thin, very lapping, sort of like final flavours in the cup. And then for the development sort of post first crack, this for me depends on the process. So if I'm doing a washed coffee, I probably need to be, spending about a minute 15, no more than a minute and a half, sort of after first crack. But this is where I also focus on development degrees. I very respectfully, professionally say that using percentages don't work in roasting, especially the development ratio percentage. The reason being is that, a suggested ratio percentage post first crack of, say, on a sample roast, let's say it's like, 12%, 13%, something like that. But what you've got to look at is how many degrees did you increase by in that percentage of time. So you can do another sample roast and still do 13% development ratio percentage, but you might increase by, say, 6 degrees. You do another roast, the same development percentage, and you only increase by 3 degrees. So that percentage doesn't tell you how you're controlling the heat and the roaster, all that kind of stuff. Your brain's naturally going to see a different end temperature, of course, but if you're only focusing on percentages, you're not going to understand why that coffee tastes so different. So, unfortunately, percentages they're quite. I know it's a weird word to say, but they're quite dangerous in roasting, especially in that phase time, because it's only talking about the time you spend from first crack to the end of the roast. It also doesn't tell you the journey. How did you get to first crack? Did you do it with a 3-minute yellow and a 4-minute mid section, all that kind of stuff. So you need to know the full structure of the journey, along then, of course, with your end roast colour. And then, of course, that strategy will also then teach you how best to adjust whatever machine you're using and how best to apply. So, I know I say, say 4.5 minutes in, for yellow. If I'm on an air roaster, I have to understand that first phase has to be faster. So I might be looking at, say, 3.5 to 4 minutes, on an air roaster. And so whether it be, like your car was a great example. So whatever you do on the Pro Mat, just take a minute, off that kind of front section, because we're missing that first, I guess like journey.
And
yellow onwards, doesn't matter whether it's a bare roast or a probat, whatever you're using, I'm always consistent in that middle section and that development section. Now, in terms of degrees, we've always got to remind ourselves that all the machines use different probes, different types, different thicknesses, different positions. So we need to, through trial and error and record keeping, we need to show ourselves. So from the marked first crack temperature, so where we're hearing that consistent, actually, I digress. On a sample roast, I am pretty responsive. When I hear a crack in sample roasting, I do tend to go with it pretty quickly. In production, I do tend to wait just a little bit longer for the consecutive pops in production. So I would say I'm a bit more reactive with sample roasting because, as you know, like once they start cracking, like things can happen really quickly, sort of post first crack on the sample roasters. So I'm quite quick, with that marking. Yeah. So yeah, I'm quite tight then in terms of, yes, most of the machines these days are using like a 3mm, sort of K-type probe in some way or form. So, we've spoken about, development degrees and times and suggested things. So that's what roasters need to do through their own record keeping in terms of writing down the key times and temperatures, obviously from the beginning for their yellow, for their first crack and their end, time and temp, but also with their colour measurement. And then from first crack to the end of the roast, then just calculate how many degrees did they increase by over a certain amount of time. And if that tastes really great, then that becomes their roadmap. So you've got to show yourself your roadmap so you know what to keep on doing. And I guess, no doubt, people watching should also be going, but now what about different processes? Now what about different screen sizes, different origins? So I do find sometimes roasters, they get a little bit psyched out by process, if that makes sense. So we've got a, carbonic maceration, natural process or something that had a really special treatment, and it's knowing where do I assign the information about the coffee. So moisture content, density, process, screen size, and the amount of coffee that's going in the roaster. So I always start the roast based on the size of the bean and the moisture content because we need to activate moisture. We need to turn that moisture into steam pressure so we can get the beans to crack, and then we deal with the density in the process. So that process, obviously if it's a heavily processed coffee, we're going to have to be very careful that we don't burn that, and we really need to, showcase that sort of post first crack and not get too much, roast level, on that coffee. Hence, we come up with those approaches where if we've got a heavily processed coffee, we spend less time post first crack, and if we've got a washed coffee, it needs a little bit more time, to get what we need out of it, things like that. So I do think also maybe there's a bit of, I know there is actually in terms of a very different thought process in terms of where to assign things like density and moisture content in the roasting. But personally, I would never start a roast based on density. Never, ever, ever, ever. And I think Australian coffee and Brazilian coffee is a great example because I've been doing a lot of roasting for like the World Coffee Research, the variety trials. And that's all being grown in, say, northern New South Wales, very similar, latitude, to you guys, very similar growing conditions. And so we've got all these different varieties, but because of the elevation, they're all really low in density. But when I received the samples, they were really high in moisture, like 13% in moisture, very low in density. So if I start sample roasting these coffees, addressing the low density, there is no way that I would have been able to roast those beans in order to address because a lot of them had got big screen sizes and high moisture. So yeah, I think there's a little bit of maybe, different thinking out there at the moment in terms of where to apply the thought process with the properties of the green, because that's essential. It's all about, your green, you then understand your machine, and then you also understand your roasting approach and profile. There's those kind of three key things that we're bringing to the whole roasting process. sample roasting, production roasting, it's across the whole roasting process. Yeah.
Wow, what a masterclass.
Yeah. I just want to go out there and start roasting.
That scoops.
Yeah.
That scoops.
But essentially, yeah, how you want to roast, we all need to bring that to the roaster, and I think that's what's missing with roasters is they're not analysing their roasting approach enough. I think as you sort of mentioned earlier in our chats, in terms of like roasting is a cooking process, so we need to bring a recipe to the roaster, and what does that look like? It looks like 3 key phases. Your first phase to yellow, your middle phase, with the Maillards, reaction starting, and then your development post first crack. And so through trial and error, you roast, you record, you then taste, and then you analyse. And if you're not doing those steps to show yourself what's working or not working, then yeah, the roasters are going to get frustrated and sort of keep on going around in circles, not understanding why things aren't working. And then they try and, I guess, then get caught up with the technology on the roaster or the technology with the software, and they forget about the basics of cooking, the basics of just, what do you want to do with this coffee? How do you want to turn these beans from green to brown? Do you want to do it fast? Do you want to do it slow? And then that's going to teach you how to start adjusting the roaster to make things happen on time. And so it does, please, for everybody watching, please don't let anybody tell you that looking at the coffee is a school technique. Like, that is roasting. The sensory evaluation of watching the beans physically change, that is roasting. And it's the rate at which that happens at. That's what determines what we like and don't like, about our roasting. Everything that's happening on the screens that's just a feedback loop from a probe, into the screen. And things happen, you might get a bump, you might get a bit of a wobble. It just depends on the feedback loop between that probe and the computer. Is it really a true, reflection of what's going on with the bean? I would much rather look at the environment more so than the bean, things like that. So just that depends on, what's being measured in your roaster. Yeah.
Just coming back to your previous comment, that I think it's really interesting about latitude and altitude. So it's another huge paradigm you have in coffee industry, that only high altitude coffees can taste good. But we often say like misunderstandings in terms of how to approach the roasting of lower density, but if they are high latitude coffees. So could you better rephrase this or better explain to the ones that are not common to latitude coffees?
Yeah, I think again, whether it's the experience with roasting your coffees or roasting the Australian coffees, because we've got the exact same growing conditions in a sense, where we've got beautiful, fabulous soil, fabulous climate, everything ticks the boxes, but not necessarily the altitude or the height. So it just obviously means that the lower down we are, we've just got those different, conditions there. But it doesn't mean it does mean, of course, that the beans do develop, a little bit. Correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of they ripen a bit quicker on the trees. And also structurally the beans just have naturally a lower density than those grown at a higher altitude, because of the different levels of, is it to oxygen to carbon dioxide, and then length of time on the tree, and the ripening of the cherry and stuff like that. So, but no, I think it just comes down to just remembering the properties of the green. Like, what are you putting in the roaster? What size is it? What's the moisture content? Is it soft or hard? And then knowing how to deal with that information so you can get the best out of that coffee. So yeah, it definitely comes down to, roasters really owning up to their roasting approach, and remembering what they're roasting. So I guess, that's where we do sort of come up with, that steak analogy. You've got a big thick piece of fillet and you've got a really skinny piece of, Wagyu or Scotch fillet or whatever it is, but you want the same level of caramelising on the outside. You're going to use a very different heat treatment on each, piece of meat. So you've got your high altitude, your low altitude.
Good example.
But yeah, so I know it's a very crude example, but that's how I sort of sometimes kind of see it. It's a way to sort of help people see, you know, you can still get great flavors from either of those. It's a cut of, you know, of steak, but it's the same with, just because it's high grown doesn't mean that it's going to be, you know, necessarily better. Because as you know, there's a lot going on between the moment the cherry comes off the tree through to, you know, milling and you know, through the getting into that export bag. So yeah, just because it's from high altitude doesn't mean it's always better quality. No, definitely not.
Yeah. I generally also see some problems in the chain of some rejections of samples. So sometimes we see some buyers or some roasters, they like just one trial, and they reject a per shipment sample. So as you have experience in different roles from the chain, and you are a high skilled professional. So what recommendations would you give to a green coffee buyer and to a farmer in order you can decrease the level of rejections, and in order we could set up the best quality control system with feedback as possible? What would be your general recommendation?
Well, I think to the roasters or traders per se that may be like rejecting a coffee, you know, we've really got to, you know, clarify with them their roasting approach, like how did they roast the coffee, and whether they're using, and I probably have seen a bit where they might be using the same roasting, you know, recipe for all different beans. So, and I think we see this a lot, you know, in some of the competitions where you're trying to put a natural process and a wash process on the same profile. If that profile is going to favour one process over the other. And it's the same thing, you know, with, if somebody is using the exact same approach on everything, then of course, you know, it's not going to work on one coffee and it's going to work on the other. So I would definitely recommend roasters have a couple of different approaches, whether it be based on, you know, the process and that final roast level. And then obviously thinking about whether they have like a low moisture or a high moisture, you know, kind of approach as well, you know, for their so they've got to have at least a couple of different profiles basically for their sample roasting to really showcase, you know, that specific, you know, origin, being varietal process, you know, in the appropriate way. And I guess from the, like, you know, origin farmer's perspective, oh goodness, do you mean in terms of like getting the feedback from the roasters, or maybe how they can communicate to help them understand their coffee better? Or are we potentially saying that we can really help educate producers to recommend, you know, we recommend our coffee be sample roasted, we recognise it's this variety, it's this green size, it's this process, you know, we recommend this, you know, sort of standard, you know, kind of recipe. Because I think that unfortunately that's what's missing in the industry is some standard recipes or an agreement on what does that sample roasting standard recipe look like. And it's definitely the same, you know, just stepping out quickly into that production. You know, one thing I'm quite passionate about trying to work out is how can we have regional standards around the world for defining a light roast, a medium dark roast. So it's a starting point, it's a baseline. You don't have to like it, but at least you've got a recipe to start with. And it's a recipe of time with those phases, along with the recommended, obviously, you know, colour as well.
Yeah.
And so we kind of need that for sample roasting. So we do need like a bit of a revision, I think, in terms of, you know, what that recipe could look like, to really help alleviate that whole, you know, back and forth process of, you know, the coffee's great, you send it to be, you know, you send a sample out, it gets rejected, well then, and then you start looking at their roasting practices, and so you've got to help them understand best practices on how to get the best out of your coffee. So then how can you also help other you know, producers in your region also know that so they can also communicate. If they're ever in a situation where something gets rejected, they can say, hey, did you try this profile approach? Yeah.
That's great. That's great.
Is that something you see? Is that something, because I know you guys are really fabulous with the group of producers that you work with, the education and support that you give, all the producers in your group. Do you think that's something that they're comfortable learning, or they would want to work more on?
We have been trying. I think we have this. It's really a lot first paradigm breaking. So again, if you think about Brazil, you cannot say a standard for Brazil. So Brazil is a continent. You have all these different origins, varieties, processings, farms. So they are completely different. So we go from 23 south to equator and some robustas in the Amazon forest. So it's completely different. But I think this communication, this feedback that we're saying, like being able to try communicating in the same language. And one of the things that I see that we are developing a lot in terms of cupping and describing flavors and calibrating in terms of flavors. But I think we missed some point how to better calibrate the roasting and the sample roasting. I think it's a huge bottleneck in the industry. So this is one of the things that I see, like roasting many different times, one specific per shipment sample, for example, and seeing how it better express or giving the chance, like knowing that you have a supply chain behind you that is selecting some of the best coffees to send you. So I think this kind of feedback, and then also empowering the origin or empowering your partners, I think this is big part of the success too. That's one. Yeah.
Yeah,
one
definitely.
point.
Just as you were sort of chatting there, the one thing I did think about, when you were talking about, there's still that, we're still haven't really agreed, totally on that, sampling roasting approach. I think one thing I also see, one of the most common things we're quite blind on when we're roasting a brand new coffee is when the beans crack. So when we're framing up those phases, and I can see, where some roasters might want to use then, I guess, dare I say, like a blanket, a standard approach. So that's when I would definitely use things like the process, because you get to know that, sometimes your water processed coffees crack a little bit earlier, your natural processed coffees crack a little bit later. So things like that I can definitely see, because I've been in many situations where, again, like using those world coffee research variety trials, I actually received all of those coffees blind. I had no idea what I was roasting. So I had to research every bean, and there was 24 samples that I had no idea. So I had to do the moisture content, the density. I could physically see the process that was going on the bean, and obviously I did all the screen size as well. And I just remember saying to myself, oh my goodness, this is going to be quite epic. So I just had to really, frame it up and just, obviously with the roaster that I was using and the back size, I could then work out a starting temperature and a starting routine, and then really work out how do I get this bean to get to yellow at a certain time, and then I could then see how it was going to crack based on whether it was like washed or natural, or whatever it might have been, and then develop accordingly from there. So that's probably where I see a bit of a pain point in sample roasting, is that it's a brand new coffee, and we're a bit blind on that cracking event, which I then see then obviously I can understand the favouring of using then some of those, the software that runs things automatically. I get that. But the thing is, if you don't know how to roast manually first, then you won't be able to manage the automation, if that makes sense. Yeah, so you still need to, and I love your carvers, I'm definitely not picking on them, but I'm just saying, you still need to manage that carbon profile and make sure that things are going to map out, appropriately. So what's the temperature for yellow? What's the temperature for approximately for cracking? So then you can frame up the development post-burst appropriately. And then you can just keep on then tweaking that based on, the different beans that you're using. So, yeah. So, So I guess, I think it's really highlighting, isn't it? Is how do we come up or revise the current suggested standards for what a sample roast is meant to be. And I really think we need to bring more of that structured thought process in terms of how we move the coffee through the phases, the recommended timings, what does that look like on whatever specific machine you're using, and then go from there. Yeah.
I think it's a lot of power for less than 10 minutes, isn't it?
Yeah.
Coops. So again, thank you so much for joining us and for bringing all these insights and this grateful knowledge. So if people want to follow you, if people want to see the articles that you are writing, your consulting projects, how can they proceed?
So there's my website. So it's eqmr.com.au. Or they can just find me on Instagram.
And what does it mean?
Equilibrium Master Roasters.
That's it.
Yes.
Equilibrium. It's a matter of equilibrium,
Yes.
huh?
Yes.
Yes. The power of balance. But yeah, from the website, you will definitely find, whether a link through to, you can do online consulting, there's a link through to the roasting course, or you can just contact me, ask the question, go from there. But yeah, happy to help in any way, and I'm sure, people are going to have, lots of wonderings and questions, and what about this and what about that. But yeah, I still think at the end of the day, we really need to, as an industry, really define that. Well, how do we want to roast, and what does that look like, and how do we find a way to agree on a standard way? Whether it be sample roasting, production roasting, roast levels, with roast profiles. So I guess some sort of standards that we can start with, and then build from there. Yeah.
Definitely.
Amazing. Yeah.
Any final message?
No, just grateful for all the knowledge you shared today. It's very insightful. Yeah.
It's always a pleasure and honour to, be invited and have the opportunity to chat and, So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Coops, thank you. Cheers, my friend.
Yeah.
Hope to see you soon.
Where is your cup? Yeah.
Have a nice day and hope to see you soon in Australia.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Amazing, mate. So that's Coops. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's Coops.
Just